Show me the options in the gift box.
Kavai Māpuna kapu kaha ha'a inu ha'a ola ha'a kapu ha'a noe e nā kupu kupu o nā kupuna e mālama ka māpuna mālama ka māpuna I ola loa I mauli ola
Aloha, hafade zantiro. Wahu si Sami Birmingham-Babauta. My name is Sami Birmingham-Babauta, and good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Mahalo kea for opening up the space for us with our pule. My home is in Saipan in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, also known as the CNMI, where my backyard overlooks the waters of Lau Lau Bay. The Sinamai is located in Micronesia and is the indigenous lands of the Carolinian and Chamorro people. And this is a photo of my backyard that I took from home that will be used for today's PowerPoint template. So again, my name is Sami. I am now a second-year PhD public health student, and I'm also a graduate research assistant with the Māpuna Lab. And the Māpuna Lab is a place of respite for those experiencing colonial trauma. As you'll see today in our webinar, the work that we work to do is to center and create culturally safe spaces in the different, for Native Hawaiians and for other Pacific Islanders in Hawaii, and hopefully abroad and across the continent, so that we can do public health programming or behavioral health programming that makes sense and feels safe and comfortable for us. So for today's webinar, we have 3 learning objectives. The first is that participants will engage in an immersive learning experience that will equip them to integrate and advocate for culturally and linguistically competent behavioral healthcare for Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders in line with the cultural component of the SAMHSA's recovery model. The second is that participants will identify strategies to create culturally safe spaces in their programming in line with the cultural considerations for core function 3 orientation in the 12 core functions of substance abuse counselors. And then objective 3 is that participants will examine the impacts of colonization on the Ahupuaʻa conceptualization by Papaʻola Lokahi, and understand its utilization in developing culturally safe spaces of learning and healing. So this is kind of a breakdown of our agenda today. And so next we're going to move into our consent to deepen, and then go into our different frameworks, talk about strategies for creating culturally safe spaces, and then give an example of how the Māpuna Lab tries to create a virtual culturally safe space. And then we'll close for the day. And so now we ask for your consent to deepen with our frameworks and with some of the topics. We know that it might bring up feelings, and so you have every right, if you feel like you need to step away from the computer, to step away from the Zoom, or to exit completely. And take this knowledge and this time at your own pace. And if you'd like to leave, it's okay. If you need to pause, that's okay. And if you stay with us, that's okay too. And so now I think that we have Lilinoe with us today.
Yes, aloha. Ahahea ke anola ina ohana. Ua mai ole o ka aina mali e. He nani wale no I ka makaloha. He ia kahile oe. He pane mai ho ila. Aloha e, aloha e. Oia, aloha. Aloha mai kako. O Lilinoe ko hikaua ko uinoa. No pi'i honua, no hilo mai au. O makamoku o Keali. O mauna wa kia ku mauna o ailuku ku uwai. Ea ko umakumu loa a kiola I ka hala o ola. So aloha nui, my name is Lilinoe Kohikaua. I'm super excited to be here. I am from the Ahupuaʻa Pi'i Honua in Hilo on Hawaii Island. And mahalo Sami and Māpuna Lab for inviting me here today and allowing us to jointly share this space. And the other part of my introduction, I brought in 2 land sources that anchor me in my wahipana, my sacred space. That's Mauna Kea and the Wailuku River. Both of those are on Hawaii Island, and those are my sources that I connect to and ground myself whenever I'm away from home and when I'm at home too, of course. The other part of my introduction was an olelo no e au, loa'a Keali ka halaola. And that olelo no e I like to bring into my introduction because it was gifted to me by my
Join the meeting.
About my own healing journey. So I have been on a healing journey from substance use and dealing with mental health issues for many, many years. And that olelo no e au refers to the part of Hiaka's journey where she has gone to fetch lohi'au for her sister, and she is bringing that healing back into him. And so I really identify with that mo'olelo of Hiaka. Because it's the journey that she goes on, that journey of self-discovery, to learn who she is, to learn about her powers of healing. And she starts to bring life back in. And so I very much identify with that along my own healing journey of just self-discovery and being able to now give back to the community in terms of folks that are on similar journeys as myself. So that's why I like to bring that into my my introduction. So a little bit about my organization. Actually, I'm representing two organizations today. So you may have seen the Ohana Center of Excellence. This is a new project to develop a Center of Excellence for Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders for behavioral health. It is a source of empowerment, education, and support for individuals seeking behavioral health care, including mental health and substance use resources. We center on holistic and cultural approaches to serving the needs of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. We also provide training and technical assistance for those working in the fields of substance use. Sorry, Kalamai, you guys, I forgot to put a slide in for this. I'm just going to read you guys this. Provide training and technical assistance for those working in the fields of substance use, behavioral, and mental health to better serve the needs of, again, our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities through culturally responsive care. We serve a diverse group of populations across Hawaii, across the continental US, the associated Pacific Islands, as well as Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. As I put our link in the chat there, we're just starting up. This is a joint project between Māpuna Lab, who is taking lead on Native Hawaiian populations, and then San Jose State and CSU East Bay, which is taking lead on our Asian American populations. And then we're still recruiting and bringing in our Pacific Islander cousins into this conversation so that we can all have equal representation throughout this project. And then about the other organization that I represent, Māpuna Lab, we are the Native Hawaiian Health Board. We were authorized by the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act, originally passed by Congress in the 80s. Our mandate is to raise the health status of Native Hawaiians and their families to the highest possible level. And we do this through our strategic partnerships, programs, and public policy. And then in order to perpetuate our mission as an Indigenous organization, we always look to our past to provide guidance for our future and how to help heal our people. So our kanaka thrived for centuries in Hawaii, obviously before contact, and we developed this complex system of resource management called the Ahupuaʻa, which is a land division of interconnected systems that stretch from the mountain to the sea. Next slide, sorry.
Okay, like there's a mute button, right?
Hi, Auntie Lahala.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to find the mute button.
No worries. Next slide. Sorry, I was just cruising. Forgot I wasn't doing my end. And then how about, let's go all the way to the next. Go one more slide. Oh, wait, go back. Sorry. There's a delay. One more. Okay, right there. And so we developed this complex system of resource management called the Ahupuaʻa, which is this land division of interconnected systems that stretch from the mountain to the sea, which are all connected through Vai, which flowed through each of our systems independently to bring life. And no one system functioned independently. And then Kanaka, our people, tended to these systems, knowing that our resources were finite and that the land has to flourish in order for all of us to survive. So our people understood this balance between mind, body, and spirit, as well as individual, family, community, environment, spirituality, which you see kind of depicted on the framework to the left, which represents the reciprocal nature of all of our relationships within a Hawaiian worldview. And so these aspects are fundamental to maintaining our optimal health, our maliola. And then with Western influence and colonization, it triggered this imbalance in Native Hawaiian society, which shifted our paradigm of Native Hawaiian family systems. And then cultural, historical, intergenerational traumas that stemmed from that impact of colonization and criminalization of the Native identity then affected each of our subsequent generations. And then the outcomes of these traumas are reflected in higher rates of health disparities, which include mental health and addiction, which have in turn then impacted our social and cultural determinants of health. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of take you on this journey about the Ahupuaʻa framework that Sami had mentioned, and I'm going to kind of share with you why we approach things like this. And it has a lot to do with the overrepresentation of Kanaka Maoli and across our those accessing treatment, across our mental health services and incarceration, which you'll see on the screen there. Next slide. So for our answers, in order to approach this work, we look to our ike kupuna, our ancestral knowledge that's been passed down through the generations. What our people need to heal. And so a roadmap for this process really comes to us from a previous community collaboration whose vision it was to ensure that Native Hawaiians, their families, and communities have access to substance use and mental health services that honor culturally responsive treatment. So this partnership was blessed with the name Imikiola Mau by Hulu Kupuna Auntie Malia Craver, and it translates to perpetuate a life of health and healing. And so that foundational work brought together countless Native Hawaiian organizations and kupuna who paved the way for this work in the decades prior. And so I always share these quotes, and if you've been to other sessions that I presented, and you probably heard these quotes before too, but I like to bring them into every space because this is the why, right? So in order for Native Hawaiians to heal and recover from substance use, and this says Native Hawaiians because this report was focusing on Native Hawaiians. In this space today, we're talking about culturally safe spaces for all cultures. So I just want to preface that. So in order for Native Hawaiians to heal and recover from substance use and mental health issues, we need a sense of place which provides anchors for our values and balance in life. We need immediate access to and availability of a safe, healthy environment, which includes all natural elements such as kai, saltwater, wai, freshwater, air, aina, land, and all of the animate and inanimate aspects of nature which make up this physical environment. To heal, we need more than just Western practices, for their practices are not what is going to make people well. The motivation comes from caring for our sources, the aina, and the reward is our own wellness, which we perpetuate in all our relationships through caring for the aina. We need the resiliency and protection our culture provides in order to prevent relapse and redefine ourselves away from pathological diagnosis. We need a sense of self retrieved from our past through our ancestors, present through purpose, and future through descendants. We need our language, traditions, and ceremonies, which provide ways to reconnect to our spirituality, to our concept of source. We need our lands and other natural resources, our language, our aumakua, our deified ancestors, our kupuna, our elders, our ohana, our family, and our roles as makua, as kamali'i, as parents and children, and kanaka. We need not become Western to heal. So I share that because this was in a report to SAMHSA by this Imikiola Mau group. And this was born out of a COSIG grant. So this is a really important part, right? And as soon as we've seen many times in Hawaiian spaces or in cultural spaces, when the funding runs out, often the project stops as well. And so this is kind of what happened with this project as well. So I think we really want to bring this into space because we want to honor the work that has been done and uplift it and carry it forward. The next slide. So I want to present an Aina-based model, the Ahupuaʻa. So this model was influenced by the healing forest model created by White Bison, as well as Dr. Keali Koholopula's framework for the social and cultural determinants of health, which you'll also see there on the right. And it was drawn by a local Native Hawaiian artist on Hawaii Island named Kimo Paka. And so the Ahupuaʻa model provides a metaphorical and a living model to view the ongoing impacts of colonization and the impact of uplifting our risk and resiliency factors of culture. So our historical trauma, the other risk factors on native peoples, and provides this resonant model of native systems. So and this model itself is grounded in that reciprocal relationship of kanaka to aina and spirituality. So the Ahupuaʻa is a living, breathing example of a healthy, thriving native system, which is all connected through vai. And that then flows through every interconnected system. And so if the water is not healthy, like maybe it's contaminated by pollutants or something, then we are not healthy, right? Because that water is flowing through all of the interconnected systems of the Ahupuaʻa, and everything then becomes unbalanced and unhealthy. So the left side of the image here, you can see risk factors. Can you go to the next slide? The risk factors. So you see, this is the rain part of it, the top half. You can see on the left side, the risk factors that impact Native Hawaiian individuals, Ohana, and communities, such as colonization, historical racial trauma, and discrimination. And so these impacts are then carried through the Ahupuaʻa system, impacting the generations that emerge from this land. These risk factors are visually depicted here in the ua, as you see, just symbolically in order to show that cyclical transmission of the risk factors through that water cycle. Because water is life, right, for our people, for our land, but also then, as we all know too well, the health of our vai is constantly at risk from external contamination. And so we've seen this with things like Red Hill, right, and so many other examples. Our vai needs time. It's going to take time for it to heal from the contaminations, even as it continues along that water cycle. So then if we visualize these risk factors coming into our Ahupuaʻa through the vai as a conduit, as these risk factors or contaminants then penetrate the land, they create these layers of anger, guilt, shame, and fear, or this eha in the soil. Next slide. Did you guys hear the rooster crowing outside? So you'll see here on the left side, the layers of anger, guilt, shame, and fear, that eha that's in the soil. So this eha, or that pain and trauma, is then passed down from generation to generation and becomes compounded by this unresolved grief, right? So that eha, or that healthy, impacted soil, then runs off down the kahawai or the river and is carried downstream and starts to impact all the rest of our interconnected systems. And then everything starts to become unbalanced. So you can see all the other systems that are connected to that water source. So we can look at the Ahupuaʻa as a reflection of our ohana, our communities, ourselves, and even on a larger scale, our care systems, right? Our state systems even. So if we zoom in and take a look at the impact that this has had on one of our systems, particularly the lo'i, right? So we see, so the lo'i it's a wetland system for growing taro, in case anyone is not familiar. So we can use that lo'i as an aina-based model to visualize the internal and external impacts that trauma and then the manifesting symptoms of substance use on our lahui ecosystem. So within the lo'i, we can look at our kalo as a reflection of ourselves, right? Of Haloa, who's our ancestor, if you're familiar, our root, right? Our older sibling, as our stories tell us, and that which really feeds our people. And as that unhealthy soil enters into our lo'i, our kalo system, it becomes that which feeds the next generation of kalo that then emerge from it. And today we may have then generations of our people that are born with all of this internal eha buried down deep inside of them. And if that eha begins to bubble up to the surface, it can start to manifest in many ways, like anger, violence, substance use, mental health issues. And these are all symptoms, right? Symptoms that give way to an unhealthy ahupuaʻa. But just as trauma is passed on generationally, can you go back one slide? Our ancestors also passed down our strengths, our resiliency, our protection that our culture provides, which flows then impacts each of our systems in a similar way. So these are our protective factors, which you'll see on the right-hand side of the image. And if we focus on this, we can see a pathway forward in cleaning our water of those risk factors in order to improve and increase the protective and resiliency factors for all of the generations to come. So on a macro level, right, big picture, we're creating a healthy Ahupuaʻa where our people thrive, achieve Mauliola, all through collective balance of this reciprocal relationships between our kanaka, aina, and our spirituality. And then on a more micro level, go to the next slide. So on a more micro level, you know, if we're looking at that lo'i, right? Imagine one day we're working in the lo'i and we find one kalo that is sick or manifesting trauma as addiction, right? And first we kind of have to look around, are the other kalos sick? We have to find that source of that sickness, or how is that ma'i getting in? Are the other kalos sick? Is the whole lo'i sick? How is it getting in? We have to look up our interconnected alwai, our canals, and up the kahavai, the river, for the sources of where the sickness could be getting in, or this pollution, right? This eha, how is that getting in? And if we can't find the source of that ma'i, right, of that sickness, then we instead decide, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and take that one kalo out and I'm gonna heal it, and then I'm just gonna put it right back in, right? It's only gonna get sick again because we haven't done any of the work to heal the space around it. And this is kind of what we're doing now with incarceration, types of residential treatment that are off island, right? Pulling people out, trying to fix them, and then dropping them right back into the unhealthy environment or that they live in, right? We need to, that environment hasn't had a chance to heal, whether it's the ohana, whether it's the community, whatever it is, the surrounding environment needs to heal too. So if we only continue to treat this surface symptom that we can see, the substance use, then we'll only continue to get the same result because we haven't addressed the root of the issue. So we really have to put in the work to address that root, look far enough the system, digging deep enough to find the source that's contributing to that unhealthy environment. So the Ahupuaʻa model itself is aimed at providing this framework to implement cultural interventions at various places within the Ahupuaʻa to effectively provide healing impacts that not only help to heal the individual, but their ohana and community and the larger systems as well. And so interventions within the framework would aim to decrease intergenerational transmission of risk factors while increasing intergenerational transmission of resilience and protective factors. So cleaning our vai, cleaning it as it journeys throughout our interconnected systems and then is reborn through the water cycle to fall down once again, right? Because the ua goes through the whole Ahupuaʻa, goes out into the ocean, gets evaporated back up, back into the lani, and then comes down as the ua again. So this increase in protective and resiliency factors will, in effect, contribute to this healthy lo'i, which you see on the right-hand side, with happy, healthy little kalo that are rich with soil that is rich in, that is vai, rich in lokahi, mauliola, mana, and pilina, right? So balance, health, spiritual energy, and connections, which are all foundational values for a thriving lahui, which, you know, again, is on the right side of the image. Next slide, please. So embracing this culturally grounded approach would, we hope, you know, provide this a paradigm shift for how society and folks will see themselves in relation to the world around them. Because imagine the empowerment of nurturing and uplifting our unique gifts that are contained right within our protective and resiliency factors. That's our culture. That is what keeps us safe, what keeps us grounded, what keeps us healthy. By understanding these multiple threads that impact folks' lives, we can build this more robust, comprehensive, holistic approach that incorporates the cultural ways that we keep ourselves healthy. So this system or this framework was brought forth in order to support our cultural ways of life. Not that they needed support necessarily, but within a Western system, it can often be difficult to have our cultural interventions, right? And sometimes we can feel like we're trying to push our cultural interventions into a box that the Western system needs, when in reality, they should be supported in their truest form. And so that's kind of the reason why we brought forth this model. And so it's still, you know, it still exists today. The Ahupuaʻa is still a thriving system that we see all over the place being reclaimed and revitalized. And so I share this with folks today, and I mahalo Māpuna Lab and everyone for allowing me to share this framework in this space today. Mahalo.
Mahalo nuis and susus ma'asi. Lilinoe, thank you so much for that overview. And we're going to go into two other frameworks that we mentioned in our learning objectives, and kind of the idea of this two-eyed seeing, which is another Indigenous framework of like collaborating Western ways with Indigenous knowledge, and creating that. And so with what we just learned, we wanted to ask you to reflect on two questions. And if you'd like, you can enter that into the chat. What is your Ahu and what is your Pua'a? And so that was so much great information. Again, thank you, Lilinoe. And so as you sit and reflect with that, if you want to add them into the chat, please do. If you just want to take notes on the side, that's fine too. I'm also just going to try something real quick. It's bothering me that this is not full screen. And so without like completely messing up the whole setup I have now, which we all know, if you do Zoom and all of that, one mess up can ruin everything. I'm just going to see if I can full screen. What is it? It says Command Shift F. Oh, yay, I did it. Okay, if this happens to you and everything's stuck, you can do Shift Command F and it will full screen and you won't lose all your setup. Also, there is construction going on. So if you cannot hear me, please put that in the chat and I will put in my AirPods. So hopefully make it better. All right, so the other two frameworks that we wanted to discuss today, and also this is the kickoff of our summer series. And so throughout the series, we'll be going over these three, the Ahupuaʻa and then these two frameworks, Western frameworks. And so kind of just setting the stage for the rest of the series. And so the first one is SAMHSA's working definition of recovery. And so it has all of these components and they all work together to achieve recovery. But we really wanted to uplift the cultural aspect since that is today's webinar. And as Lilinoe said, sometimes it's very difficult to make the case that we need these culturally safe spaces or we need these Indigenous methods in our Western workplaces in a way that it's accepted and supported and kind of should be what is and the gold standard. And I'm sure many of us have had that experience where we get pushed back and it's not always. And then the other framework is the 12 core functions of substance abuse counselors. And so what we're kind of focusing on today from that is the orientation aspect, which I will talk a little bit more in a few slides. And so looking at SAMHSA's working definition of recovery, we again wanted to highlight culture because we appreciated that it's listed here and that they are expressing that it's an important part of recovery. And it helps us be able to make stronger cases for this is why we need to offer services in this way. This is why we use the Ahupuaʻa model and stuff like that when we're especially working with federal funds and grants and whatnot, where we have to do that translation in an administrative way. And so here it defines, it says recovery is culturally based and influenced culture and cultural backgrounds in all of its diverse representation, including values, traditions, and beliefs, are keys in determining a person's journey and unique pathway to recovery. Services should be culturally grounded, attuned, sensitive, congruent, and competent, which I will talk about the word competent in a little bit, as well as personalized to meet each individual's unique needs. And then for the framework, we're focusing on orientation, or for the 12 core functions of CSAT. And so core function 3 orientation is describing to the client the following: the general nature and goals of the program, rules governing client conduct, and infractions that can lead to disciplinary action or discharge from the program in a non-residential program, the hours during which services are available, treatment costs to be borne by the client, if any, and client rights. And so we created a version within the Māpuna Lab that offers cultural considerations for the global criteria that is listed under the orientation, the function 3. And so this is kind of what we wanted to highlight, in that we're creating behavioral health programming That is, as this first question asked, does this program offer cultural or indigenous practices? Is this explained in a manner that the client thoroughly understands the goals and objectives for client care? Cultural consideration, I'm going to just skip to the third one. To take the time to review program operations for transparency, to build rapport, identify who the players in the program are and how are they connected to culture, if they are, and where from. And so those are kind of the things that we'll be going through today. All right, so strategies for creating culturally safe programming. What is cultural safety? And so just kind of, we all kind of may define cultural safety in different ways. Probably we share foundational ways of the way that we see cultural safety, especially as varying Indigenous people doing this work. But cultural safety requires we acknowledge our biases, reflect on our personal and professional experiences, and work to create a space where the cultural values of the people we serve are respected and integrated into the work and into the programming to reduce harm, minimize prejudice, and build structures that are working towards achieving health equity. And as I mentioned, I wanted to touch on the phrase cultural competence. I kind of grew up hearing that word in college and whatnot, and we're sort of moving away from the word cultural competence and instead working with cultural humility. And what that difference is that cultural competence insinuates that there's an endpoint. There's an endpoint to learning, either whether it's your own culture or the cultures of the people that you're working with. And as we know, culture, our own cultures and other cultures, it requires lifelong learning. It's a commitment. There is not an endpoint. There are so many different perspectives and ways that we practice our own cultures and learning how other people practice theirs, that saying cultural competence may be misconstrued for people who maybe are not as connected to culture, where they think that they can just learn a bunch of things and then they're culturally competent and they don't have to keep learning anymore. And maybe even to the point where they start telling people that, you know, this is how your culture is. And we definitely don't want to do that. That is what creates more harm. What we want is to work with cultural humility, which requires that self-reflection, acknowledges that we're always learning, we're always growing, encompasses love, passion, empathy, equality. And I think one of the big things is reducing that negative power relation. And so with cultural competence, again, it's that idea of there's an endpoint, you get to a certain level of mastery and then you're good, you don't have to do any more work. You know what you know. And that creates this power dynamic sometimes between provider and patient, where the provider thinks that they know better because they've been deemed culturally competent. And we want to reduce that negative power relation by knowing that we're always learning and growing, and we can do that collectively. Sorry. Another strategy, and so because we're offering social work CEUs, I really like this article about embedding Indigenous knowledge and cultural safety into social work curriculum. And this applies to creating to programming, culturally safe programming. And so the number one, and I'm sure all of us know this, is that bringing the community into the curriculum or into the program or into whatever it is that we're trying to design. We need that community input. We need, if you're doing research, you need to engage in community-based participatory research. We have to have the people at the table that are being represented in the work there and communicating with us if we're serving them correctly. Curriculum or programming needs to focus more and embrace the positivity and richness of Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous cultural contexts, and ways of knowing, being, and doing. Social work programs or behavioral health programs must accept that Indigenous practice theories, models, and frameworks are valid concepts for working not only with Indigenous people, but for any client base, as we saw with the Ahupuaʻa model, that doesn't have to be limited to Native Hawaiians. That's a great framework. I'm Chamorro from Micronesia, that I can see how that can apply for us back home. I can see how that can apply for other client bases. And so uplifting our frameworks and knowing that they don't have to be limited to to just one culture. They are these foundations and the ways that we know things and the ways that Indigenous people have been can be applied broadly. And then the last two are a little bit more academic, but I think important still, non-Indigenous. And I'm a PhD student, so my life is very academic heavy, unfortunately. But non-Indigenous academics need to take responsibility for their own learning of Indigenous history and ways of knowing, being, and doing, and then step up and contribute to teaching and learning in proactive and authentic ways, ensuring collaboration and consultation with the community. And then lastly, universities, and this can just be organizations broadly, including all levels of senior management, must make a clear commitment to cultural safe practices across the teaching and learning spaces. And so now we want to go into how the Māpuna Lab works to create a culturally safe virtual space. We are a virtual lab and we've run 2 different webinar series. And so we've kind of incorporated this maybe model, not framework, but maybe model that we feel has been working for us. And we hope that anybody who has attended our webinars has felt like it was a culturally safe space for them. And so we did an evaluation of our last series. If anybody joined us when we talked about the Hānai Ahu framework, we did an evaluation of that to kind of see if we are on the right track, if we are creating this space. And so these are kind of what we found of how we were doing that. So setting up our virtual space, it's like a sandwich. We have 3 parts. And so we have our opening protocol, which you saw this morning. We have our song and activity. And then some of these components are, you add to your sandwich as, best fit. And so we didn't do the poo today, but we did do the pule. We do the speaker introductions in a culturally based way. And so, for example, I didn't introduce a connection to a mountain because we don't really have one inside. We have one in Saipan and I don't see it. So I don't have a cultural, I don't have a connection to that mountain. So that for me is not right, not a right way because I didn't grow up connected to it. But I am connected to the water. And so I introduced that. And then we do our consent to deepen. And then we go into our presentation and our closing protocol. And I will break down all of these pieces. So again, our opening protocol, it's intentionally selected music and imagery to ground us in the work and set the tone of a culturally safe space. We have that welcoming activity for you guys and for us to know who's in the room, for you guys to know who's in the room and kind of build this community in the 60 minutes that we have together in this webinar, unless you join us for the whole series. And then we continue building that relationship and that rapport. And then when we're able to, we blow the poo to bring into focus and preparation to engage with each other and the resources. We also open with the pule to set intentions of safety and openness in the webinar discussions. Again, thank you, Kea, for doing that for us today. We have our culturally based speaker introductions, and then our consent to deepen, which I've been in before joining the Māpuna Lab. I have been in many webinars, series, or presentations, and I've never seen a consent to deepen. And I remember being in a presentation last year where I was unprepared for the emotions that I was going to feel when they were talking about, it was about a typhoon that happened in the Philippines, and they were talking about their recovery efforts. And I had just gone through Super Typhoon U2 in Saipan in 2018. And so I was just emotionally overwhelmed and didn't expect that. And I had to leave the room, and I didn't go back in until the presentation was over. And so when I think about the consent to deepen in this case, it gives, had I had something like this, I would have felt okay. And, culturally, I felt like, oh, I'm being disrespectful, or I'm being disattentive by leaving and not saying anything. But offering this and giving that space is a nice way to allow people to take the time that they need, like I needed in that moment. And then we go into our presentation. And so again, reflecting on some of the earlier things, embedding Indigenous knowledge and cultural safety into the curriculum, into the programming, into the webinars, using a cultural framework to center our work. And so our last series, we used this Konilehua framework. And this idea, again, that I said earlier, two-eyed seeing, which is uplifting and using your Indigenous ways of knowing, and then using that also with what we know in a Western setting. And there is that, we do really want to work towards Indigenous methods being what's the main, but also recognize that sometimes these things work in tandem to create these spaces. And a great example, if you joined us for Konilehua, was when we did the expert example using the Konilehua framework. And then in our presentation, we really tried to connect to Mo'olelo. And so we had this one webinar on the work group on law enforcement for the HOI, Hawaii Opioid Initiative. And so talking about law enforcement, we connected to this Mo'olelo of the law of the splintered paddle and thinking about authority and thinking about that kind of power dynamics in that story versus what we're seeing today. And then sharing personalized stories from our speakers. And so in that webinar, I shared about my experience with law enforcement in Saipan and how it's very different in the way that our police officers are our uncles and our aunties. And so when you're getting in trouble, if you get in trouble, it's more of a scolding from an elder. And the priority you feel that they're just trying to keep you safe versus trying to keep property safe or trying to keep other people safe. We have relationship to each other. There is a community, and handcuffing somebody or putting them behind bars or throwing them in the car, those are last resorts. We really, back home, try to make sure that we honor our relationships to each other because we know we're all so interconnected through family. And so we don't want to do that if we don't have to. And then we go into our closing protocol, which we will do today. We do a mana'o'e'o, where we ask for one word of reflection. And so this works to bring together community again into the programming and unintentionally embracing positivity and richness of our culture. And I think that's super important, especially in public health work. I feel many times we work from a deficit model. We talk about the deficits, and really there's so much resilience, as Lilinoe said, there's so much strength. And just looking at this example from one of our past webinars, the words that you see here that are strong: passion, love, community, healing, this is embracing positivity and richness of our cultures. This is what people are feeling in their reflection without being prompted. We're not saying, please give us only positive words, but this is what we walk away with. And so this is what's innate to us. And so and working towards programming that really does embrace that and moving away maybe from the deficit model. And then again, encouraging self-reflection, which, as discussed earlier, is so important in practicing cultural humility and creating culturally safe spaces is always ongoing self-reflection and commitment to lifelong learning. And then we do our closing hule. And so we close with intention. We close with love and appreciation for one another, or at least we hope that's what you feel when we do this and walk away from and close this webinar. And then again, embracing the richness of our cultures, because we are so rich in our cultures with tradition and love and all of these things. And so just putting that at the center of our work to heal. And then the last part of our closing protocol, which I really appreciated again when I joined the lab. I'd never been to a webinar or a presentation where they provide you with a toolkit. And so we provide everybody with a follow-up email when the webinar ends, and we give them all the resources that were used. So all the articles that I used for my research today will be included in our toolkit. The slide deck will be included. The music that I played in the beginning will be included, so that you have access, so people have access. It's not just this one moment where you have to like screenshot or take pictures of our PowerPoint if there was anything that you really wanted. We want to share those resources with you so that you always have them and can refer to them, and create your own, whatever works for you, right? Where everybody works in different ways. We need different things. And so from all of our toolkits, you can pull the pieces together and create a culturally safe space that works for you and your clientele. And then just to wrap up again, these are the pieces that we have in creating our culturally safe webinar. These might not be this is again a Native Hawaiian centered one. And if you're doing it for a different culture or whatever you do, you can replace these things, you can add things for whatever works for you in achieving a culturally safe space and working towards health equity. And then I know we are almost at time and I'm almost done. And so framework overview, again, so just reiterating that we really wanted to emphasize the cultural aspect of this, but all of these pieces, which I hope you heard today, heard about hope, heard about purpose-driven, holistic, relational, peer support, strength, responsibility, respect, addressing trauma, like all of those pieces work together. It's not just one piece that's working at a time. All of these things have to be working to work towards recovery, to achieve recovery. And all of these things are represented in the way, in the model, in the Ahupuaʻa model we talked about today, and the framework or the model that we shared for cultural safe virtual spaces, and in the strategies offered. And again, just refreshing those cultural considerations with what we presented. Does this program offer cultural or indigenous practices? Is it explained in a manner that the client thoroughly understands the goals and objectives for client care? And I just wanted to emphasize this because we all take in information differently. And so if it's only offered through a Western perspective in which we don't have connection or understand, then we're not going to understand the programs that are being offered to us. So we need to be able to explain to clients in a way, or people participating in our programs in a way that they can understand, in a way that they learn best and participate best in. And then the third point, take the time to review program operations for transparency, to build rapport, identify who the players in the program are and how they're connected to the culture, if at all, and where from. For example, in our lab, we have multiple representations of cultures in our lab. And so we're a very culturally rich space and try to work from different lens and talk about that and see, okay, we recognizing that we do live and work in Hawaii, but we also represent other cultures, and how do we merge those two and create programs for everybody, and then specific groups when needed. And that is our presentation today. We are going to move into our closing protocol. And so I'm going to switch to, well, I'll leave this up for a second and we will drop these links in the chat. We're going to do our manaʻeʻo. And so you can either use the link and put in your one word and we'll generate a word cloud, or you can text the number 37600 from your phone, and then text Māpuna Lab 361 when you text that number, and then you can just submit words that way. And so let me move over to share screen for that. All right, we do have the poll everywhere in the chat. Oh, sorry, I didn't activate them. Okay, now it should be on, so you can send. All right, and we see the words coming in. You can share more than once. If you share a phrase instead of a one word, try to put dashes instead of space, because then the words break up. But if it's a dash, then it will stay as a single phrase. Wow, getting goosebumps just looking at this word cloud, and we will put this in the slide deck that gets shared out. But again, just that idea of looking at this, all I see is us embracing our positivity and embracing our richness. And I really appreciate you guys for spending the time with us today and seeing your reflections. It's good to see these things. And so you can continue adding for the sake of time. I'm just going to finish our closing. But yes, please keep adding because we will put the finished word cloud, and this is really growing fast. So that's so beautiful. Thank you guys. Let me just switch over back to the PowerPoint. And so we did want to share that we do have these two for previous series, the Ulu State Disaster Response, and then the Native Hawaiian Cultural Intervention, which is where we did the the Kanilehua framework. And so these are available on Hawaii. So if you want to do them for CEUs, you can, and please do them on Hawaii Train. If you want to just watch them and see what we've done, you can find those on YouTube. If you follow us on Instagram at Māpuna Lab, we have these links there. Also, we'll be a part of the toolkit. And then we all know evaluation is so important for the work that we do, especially in continuing to do this work. And so we're going to drop the evaluation link in the chat. If you can, please give us your feedback, and because we really appreciate it. But most especially if you're hoping to get CEUs from this, then it is required. But we do really hope that everybody can participate in the evaluation and let us know how we can do better, what's working. All right, and so I will invite my colleague Kea to share. We have another webinar today. It's a very crazy, hectic day and week. And so we have another one today at 12. So if you want to eat lunch with us and hear from us, I will let Kea go ahead and give us a little bit of a preview of what's to come.
Okay, mahalo nui, Sami. What an amazing presentation. I want to also just, if you could, in the chat, Lilinoe also put in a link for a survey to do for the Ohana Center of Excellence. So if you don't mind also clicking on that as well, we are really honored to be partnering with the Ohana Center of Excellence and Papololokahi. So mahalo also Lilinoe. Yes, so coming up today, just today, in a few hours, we will have our other webinar of our Hānai Ahu Anchoring Culture Substance Use Treatment and Prevention Model series. This one is on our Makavalu Na'auau Primary Prevention Curriculum for Substance Use. And this will be starting off our 4-part series for the Makavalu Na'auau. We have an amazing guest speaker, Kanoilani Davis, that will be joining us. This will be from 12 noon to 1:30. So bring your lunch and come watch our dynamic presentation that we'll have on that as well. Okay, and then I will also be closing this awesome presentation by Sami and the Māpuna Lab with this oli called Ha'ule. And so Ha'ule, this is a pule that calls for everything to fall, the heavens, the day, the night. The ha'ule kani'au is it's like the stem on the rigidness of the frond, the palm frond, that is indicative of systemic issues. And so we're asking all this to fall so that the lepo popolo, the people of the lepo, can rise, meaning like us as a people. So this is a call to dismember violent and non-resonant structures for the uprising of healing and truth, a call for radical healing, an acknowledgement of hardship, and a catalyst to activate resilience. So I invite you to Oli with me as well. Ha'ule kala, ha'ule kapo, ha'ule kalani, ha'ule kani'au, ho'ale kalepo popolo. Ha'ule kala, ha'ule kapo, ha'ule kalani, ha'ule kani'au,
Ho ale kalepo po po lo. Ha ule kala, ha ule kapo, ha ule kalani, ha ule kani aho ale kalepo po po. Mahalo upo'o 2 times to just end this presentation and time with you. Mahalo nui.